Hey guys, Dice here, and today I'm bringing to you my thoughts on Persona 5 The Phantom Cross after roughly 2 weeks of playing. When this game was first announced, I wasn't quite sure what to think of it. I like Persona 5, and I like gacha games, but a Persona 5-centric gacha game isn't exactly something I was hanging out the edge of my seat for, especially not one handled by Perfect World Games of Tower of Fantasy infamy. It's not exactly a good first impression if you ask me. Not to mention that, unlike every other Persona game released within the last few years, this one doesn't have a simultaneous release in English, and as of the time of me making this video, it has no officially confirmed release date outside of East Asian territories. This is in spite of the fact that many successful gacha games nowadays have simultaneous releases worldwide alongside a pretty aggressive marketing on both sides of the Pacific. While I'm confident that the game will be released in English at some point, all of this gives the perception that Sega and Atlus in the West see the game as a red-headed stepchild that they'll eventually release, not out of genuine passion for the game, but rather out of a financial obligation because that's just what every successful gacha does. But is the game really an embarrassing stain on the Persona franchise, or is it a hidden gem that's being wrongfully overlooked? That's where I come in. I've been a huge fan of the Persona series since Persona 3 Portable in 2010, and Persona 5 in particular has been one of my favorites since its original release. It's a game I hold in very high regard. Additionally, I've been playing gacha games ever since 2016, and since then I've dropped and picked up several gachas, and I'm currently playing a few actively. So, not to toot my own horn, but I consider myself to be the expert on this subject. But seriously, with the help of an auto-translation tool provided by the community, I've been able to play the Korean version of the game for the past 2 weeks as of this writing. While it is a machine translation, it's good enough that I've been able to understand most of the game's content and navigate it successfully. With that intro out of the way, here are my first impressions on P5X. If you've played Persona 5 before, this game will look and feel very familiar. If you're coming from other gacha games and don't know how Persona works, their gameplay loop is divided in 2 parts. First half is a dungeon crawler with light puzzle-solving elements. The combat here primarily revolves around turn-based battles, where exploiting enemy weaknesses to gain additional turns is crucial for victory. The second half, and arguably its most famous or infamous depending on who you ask, is a social sim, where players can perform various daily activities from watching a movie, studying for exams, or even hanging out with your friends. Developing these relationships can often give you various bonuses during the dungeon crawler segments, such as being able to instantly KO lower level enemy mobs without having to engage them in combat. So what does Persona 5 Cross offer to the series? Something you'll notice immediately is how it has a more streamlined, simplified version of the combat and systems found in the Persona series. This makes sense, as mobile games in general try to be more casual and easier experiences than those you'd find in a console game. Additionally, the Persona series itself is, to an extent, a more simplified, casual-friendly version of the more difficult, hardcore-focused Shin Megami Tensei series. To compare, your party members here are limited to 3 combat skills and 2 passives. The protagonist in P5X can equip up to a max of 3 personas here, limited to just 1 or 2 during the early stages of the game. While it does seem restrictive, the game offers enough mechanical depth within these seemingly limited restrictions to offer a good gameplay experience. In the characters I've played, each party member has their own mechanics and intended combat functions, so that even 2 characters within the same element has their own unique role to play, which brings me to one of the bigger gameplay changes in this game compared to Persona 5 itself. Each character has their own specific role. This works similarly to the jobs from Final Fantasy, the classes from Fire Emblem, or to use a gacha game example, the paths from Honkai Star Rail. At the moment, they are single target DPS, AoE DPS, debuffers, buffers, tanks, and healers. It's a simple system, but one that's proven to work across many games. With that said, the roles aren't necessarily too strict on the gameplay design. For example, an AoE DPS could have at least 1 single target skill, as well as buffers and debuffers are often capable of dealing plenty of damage themselves. So this does show that the game's dev team is more than willing to experiment with the roles and offer character gameplay variety even within the same role and element. Another addition is the highlights, which are these big flashy moves every character has, ranging from your standard big damaging move or even a large support buff or heal. Speaking of supports, you also have a 5th party member, which is your navigator, largely in charge of giving your party buffs once enough number of turns is passed on their cooldowns. There are only 2 navigators available at launch, but one being given away for free if you clear the first level of the Velvet Trials. these being part of the game's harder endgame content. One system from Persona 5 that received a major overhaul here was the Baton Pass. In Persona 5, hitting an enemy weakness gave you another turn, which you could then give to another party member in a Baton Pass. This system was broken as it allowed you to chain Baton Passes to nearly the entire team, if not the entire team in certain fights, with the chain making your attacks stronger and stronger with every successful pass, as well as having a reduced cost. In Persona 5X, this mechanic was nerfed heavily. When baton passing, you don't give that additional turn to another party member per se, rather they automatically launch an attack of their corresponding primary element to an enemy weak to that element, or if there are no enemies still standing weak to their element, they launch it to an enemy that's already knocked down. On the one hand, I can see why this needed to be nerfed. That's one of the many reasons why Persona 5's combat is very unbalanced in favor of the player. But on the other hand, and this is something I've come to appreciate over the years, I believe the game doesn't need to be balanced in order to be fun. Figuring out baton pass combinations and executing a string of successful passes was one of my favorite things about that game. For example, after you knock down all the enemies, you can use this additional action to perform an all-out attack, a strong AoE damaging move using your whole party. But in Persona 5, you could choose to not do the all-out attack and instead pass the turn to your healer or buffer, who would then use the reduced cost from Baton Pass to get a free heal or buff. Since that doesn't happen in P5X, I find myself defaulting to just using the all-out attack, as I can't think of many situations where its free non-elemental AoE damage isn't the best option for the situation. I'm sure there might be combat scenarios where you would want to pass on the all-out attack, but none of those have happened on my playthrough yet. For what it's worth, Persona 5X also introduces enemy shields, which means you have to land several weakness hits or criticals in order to knock them down. This game's harder stages introduces multiple boss enemies with several shields, so I can see that P5X has made up for this loss in player strategizing in its own way. At this point in time, I haven't dabbled too much in the endgame content, aside from some Velvet Trials to grab the 2 free characters available in them, and some of the later stages in the main quest, which offer a significant difficulty spike, so it remains to be seen how much of a strategic freedom the game will let you do on that end. One more gameplay component I wanted to bring up was the protagonist, Wonder. Unlike most gacha games, you can't drop him from your active party, and he's always who you will be directly controlling in the overworld and the dungeon crawling. I can see this being a deal breaker for many gacha fans. One of the biggest draws of this genre, in my opinion, is the freedom to control any character you want and build any party with any combination of characters of your choosing. That's not to say that Wonder doesn't allow freedom of player expression. As I mentioned before, Wonder can equip up to a max of 3 personas, each with its own unique roles similar to the party members. Just like in Persona 5, on console, you can get more personas using the Velvet Room to fuse 2 or more into more powerful personas, or recruit them during combat. Unlike Persona 5, P5X doesn't allow you to recruit personas by talking to enemy shadows, instead opting for simply being random drops after certain mob fights. Another way to recruit personas is via the gacha, which I'll get more into detail later on. For now, the Velvet Room and personas in P5X have a few key differences from the OG Persona 5, these being that you always keep at least 1 copy of every persona you can get. In exchange, you use these persona coins, obtained whether you get a new persona or a dupe, to fuse into new personas. Additionally, you can use the coins to grant an existing persona in your roster different skills, or even use them on the same persona to break their level limit. The personas are also given different ranks, going up in number, with higher ranked personas having generally better stats and initial level caps than the lower ranking ones. All of these different systems provide a more simplified version of what you can find in Persona 5 on console, while still giving the player enough freedom to play around with their favorites. If you want to use Wonder's initial persona, Yanosik, in the endgame content, well, the game gives you the tools to raise him and do just that. Speaking of endgame content, the higher level of Velvet Trials require 2 different teams. Wonder will need 2 sets of 3 different personas between each of them. I'll say again that I haven't tackled endgame content yet, but it's pretty obvious from just this description that the game wants you to raise multiple different personas and party members to handle the different situations found in it. Which brings me to what will undoubtedly become the biggest source of joy and despair in this game: the gacha. If you've played the more recent gachas, it'll all feel very familiar. You get gems and tickets to use to pull on the gacha from dailies, doing main and side quests, exploring palaces, and even just special logins in the mail every now and then. You then convert these gems into purple tickets for limited banners or yellow tickets for the standard banner. A generally good advice for this type of game is to never convert gems to standard tickets, as these are given in bulk by simply playing the game, and the nature of limited banners being, well, limited, makes them the more desirable option. Doing pulls on the gacha gives you personas and newer party members, with the most coveted of these being the game's limited 5-star characters. These are only available during their own limited banners, as opposed to the non-limited characters which you can get via the game's standard banner, or if you lose the 50-50 initially. Speaking of which, the game has a lower pity counter than Genshin's or Honkai's, being at 80 pulls rather than 90. As I mentioned, you might lose the initial 50-50 shot of getting the rate up character, in which case, the next 5-star you get is guaranteed to be the character rated up. In addition to that, your pity is carried over to different banners, and your current pity is displayed in-game for you to always keep track of. In practice, this means that even if you miss out on getting, say, the first limited character Joker, you could still wait for his banner to return and get him guaranteed. But you don't always have to be at the mercy of the RNGesus to build a competent team. When you first join the game, you are given a beginner banner that uses standard tickets. At 50 pulls, you can choose between 3 different standard 5-stars, these being the other 3 founding members of the original Phantom Thieves, On, Ryuji, and Morgana. Additionally, the game offers plenty of free 4-stars from either a first-time join-in bonus or for completing some of the early stages of the Velvet Trials. You can also get 4-stars from the in-game gacha shop as well. Every time you do a pull, you're given some currency, which you can exchange for a variety of options, the most useful of these being 4-star characters and extra gacha tickets. I've been busy for a good portion of the game's launch week, so I haven't been able to engage in the endgame content, nor am I familiar with what the general consensus on the meta looks like at the moment. However, the main story doesn't seem so hard in that it locks you out if you don't have the higher rarity units. I judge gachas very harshly on how viable their free and lower rarity characters are. They don't need to be the absolute best, as long as they're still good options in general. At least as far as the main story is concerned, as long as you build your team correctly, you can use just about anyone and still clear content. Finally, I should mention the game's weapon banner. In addition to characters, you can also spend your gems on the limited characters' weapon banner. This one works similarly to the character banner with a few key differences. For starters, the pity of this is lower at 70 pulls instead of 80. Additionally, you can choose 2 other 5-star weapons so that even if you lose out on getting the limited weapon, you still have a choice of getting something you want out of it. With every character having their own unique 5-star weapon, this means that you can potentially always end up with something useful. On top of all that, the weapon banner is cheaper, with a single pull costing 100 gems rather than the standard banners is 150. Even with all of this said, for these type of games, it's generally advised that free-to-play and low spenders avoid the weapon banner, as having more characters is often better than having their specific weapon. Outside of their 5-star weapons, each character has a lower rarity alternative, which are often easier to come across, usually as rewards for opening chests during the dungeon crawling. One last thing I wanted to bring up in regards to the core combat was the game's Revelation card system. This is similar to Genshin's artifacts or Star Rails' relics. Simply, they are pieces of equipment that you unlock the ability to farm for at player level 35. These have multiple pieces in a set, and each set has a set bonus when you equip multiples of the same kind. Additionally, they also have main stats that go up consistently as you level them, as well as substats that can increase randomly. I've only recently reached level 35, so I haven't been able to fully grasp how important these are, but I'm at a difficulty spike in the game, where my cardless characters are struggling to survive, much less significantly damage the main story bosses. This mechanic is typically considered to be very grindy and often the source of frustration in the aforementioned Hoyoverse games, since players often grind for a specific set which is paired with a less desirable set, and then they want the desired set to grant them the right main stat and the right substat, and on top of all that, make sure that their desired substat gain the random increases that they want. That's not to say that the artifact system is completely broken against the player. In the case of Genshin, the game allows you to have an off piece, meaning that you can afford to have all but one of the pieces of a set match and still get the set bonus. And in the case of Star Rail, most of the set bonuses provided by the relics are minuscule enough that as long as you have a good main and substats, your characters can have a completely mismatching set and still clear endgame content. And to play devil's advocate, I feel that the games with a relic system often end up feeling better than games without it, as the relics allow you to truly customize the characters you like and have the freedom to truly make a build you want and personalize it to your choice. And in both Genshin and Star Rail's cases, they're easy enough where you don't even need perfect relics or even great relics to be able to clear their respective endgame modes. Overall, as long as P5 Cross takes cues from both the games, you should still be able to clear this game's content even with mid-cards equipped. With all that said, Wonder doesn't use this card system, instead opting for a skill tree to raise his stats. You unlock more upgrades and branches at higher player levels, making him fairly easy to raise compared to other characters that require the cards. I know this isn't exactly a hardcore example, but I recently managed to beat a big difficulty spike boss that gated my progress by giving 2 of my characters random cards and leveling them. I didn't really pay much attention to their set bonuses, only really made sure that Ren and Soy had sets that boosted their speed and HP respectively, and they still managed to make the difference and allowed me to continue exploring the second palace. While I have been too busy with real-life responsibilities to play this game as extensively as I wanted, it did give me the opportunity to try out how this game's dailies and stamina system works and how time-consuming they could be for someone with a busy schedule. Another thing I judge gachas very harshly on is how time-consuming their daily logins can be, as I find many games in this genre don't respect your time even for something as basic as logging in and performing dailies. Like many gacha games, P5X offers a variety of dailies to incentivize logging in and playing every day, as well as having different nodes that cost metaverse stamina, offer rewards to help level your characters. This metaverse stamina recovers at a rate of 1 per every 6 minutes at a max of 240 stamina, totaling at about a 24-hour wait time from 0 to full stamina. This game has several systems in place to streamline this process to dump all your stamina. For starters, there's an option to speed up combat animations by 2 times, as well as an auto battle that, while not competent enough for the harder fights, is more than enough for the stamina nodes. These are pretty standard fare in most gachas nowadays. More importantly, after clearing a stamina node, you have the option to consume several instances of metaverse stamina by 2, 3, or even 4 times to gain that many times the rewards. All of this makes the dailies fairly streamlined. My biggest complaint at the moment is that I wish the game offered an overflow stamina system like in Honkai Star Rail. In that game, if your stamina caps, it will then go into reserve stamina, which you can then redeem at any time. This makes the game adjust itself extremely easy to anyone's daily schedule, as you can log in at any point throughout the day and not miss out on the potential progress that you can make to your account. In addition to metaverse stamina, there's also social stamina. This caps at 20 and recovers at a rate of 5 per daily reset. You use the stamina to do many of the game's social sim activities, from working at a part-time job to get cash or raise your social stats for the overworld, as well as perform the series' famous social links with any of the game's unique characters. I'm mixed on this, as on the one hand, there is no skip cutscene option, at least from the social activities I've done. So logging in and trying to spend this social stamina could feel more time-consuming than trying to spend all your combat stamina in the metaverse. There's also a 2 times speed up option for the cutscenes, but the social activities could still take time as you speed them up by button mashing the spacebar. This is where I appreciate that it only recovers at a rate of 5 per daily reset, as it means I could burn all of this stamina on, say, a Sunday and not have to worry about it for the better part of the week. But at the same time, I see this as a way to decrease the amount of progress you can make on leveling your social stats or progressing on the social links. With this system as it is, the social sim portion of the game will take much longer for progress to occur than the combat side of the game. I hesitate to suggest higher recovery per day, as it would mean you would have to log in and do more of these activities more often then. Sometimes I just don't have the time to do this over the course of several days. Personally, I'd raise the social stamina cap to 30. This gives you more points to play around with, as well as make the system even more casual friendly, as it would mean you could just dump all your stamina points on a Sunday and not have to worry about doing the social activities until the next week. The way social links are handled is fairly similar to how the console games handle social links. You hang out with them and accumulate enough points for the next rank by choosing the right answers, as well as giving them gifts, with more points being awarded if you give them their preferred gift item. There's a social link menu that shows you what every character's preferred gift is and where you can buy them, which is a great quality of life feature to make these segments as streamlined as possible. This screen also keeps track of whether or not you can progress to the next rank, which social stat you need to improve on if you can't. At the start, there are only 6 social links available in the game, with cattle being the only male social link option available. I understand that there will be more added as the game gets more updates, but it does feel very limited at the moment, even by the game's more simplified mobile game standards. As of version 1.1, they've added 2 more social links, with Shunkano being the game's second ever male social link option. I understand that these take time to develop, but at a rate of 2 social link options per patch, we're looking at quite a long time before the game's exclusive characters get a chance to become a social link option. Something interesting to note is how, in the console games, the social links are limited to 10 ranks each, while in P5 Cross, the ranks keep going even after rank 10, reaching as high as 20. While I understand that ultimately this is part of the way these type of games keep you busy while more content is being made, I'm still not entirely sold on this. In Personas 3, 4, and 5, there were social link rank up events that oftentimes felt like filler episodes. Obviously, many of these ranks will be more important than others. In here, while the dates you can go on are cute, it does leave me worried for how I'll feel about the social links on the whole later on. In the worst case scenario, it could end up feeling like the social links go up to 20, not because the writers have something interesting to say with the character in those 20 ranks, but because the mobile game live service nature of the game demanded that the players be constantly chasing after something, that carrot on a stick while new content is being developed. Now, before we continue on to how the story and characters are handled, I should mention something that's arguably the game's most damning flaw, and the reason why I believe the English release not happening for a while is a blessing in disguise. This game's kinda jank. There's small stuff like how battle transitions are nowhere near as smooth as in the OG Persona 5. It's a nitpick, sure, but the smoothness of the transitions are part of what made the original feel like such a fast-paced experience, despite the fact that you were ultimately playing on turn-based RPG. And then there's the fact that the game has crashed and frozen up on me on more than just one occasion. There was a time where the game crashed during a loading screen while in Mementos. Another was during a Velvet trial, where the game would become unresponsive when the turn went to Wonder. And then there was at least 2 times where the game froze up during the second palace. The first time was at the start of a small cutscene, causing me to have to restart the game. Another was this one time where Wonder just started walking forward on his own and nothing was responding, forcing me to, restart the game. It's not like I lost progress, nor did this happen enough times that it ruins the experience, but it did happen enough times for me to get annoyed. Nothing that can't be fixed by the time the game comes out in English, but still something to watch out for if you want to give this one a shot right now. And now we finally reached the part where I talk about P5X's story and characters. Now, let me preface this with the following content warnings. Number 1, I will not be getting into spoilers in this video. I will allude to a few things that happen later on, but nothing major or specific will be mentioned. If you still don't want to know literally anything and wish to jump into the game as blind as possible, you can jump to the time shown right now and avoid this section entirely. And number 2, I am using DeepL to play through this game, as I can't read Korean, nor is my Japanese at a level where I can understand the majority of this game's spoken dialogue without a translation. This is a machine translation, which will never be as good as the eventual localization done by professional translators. Still, I decided to make this section since I felt the auto-translator done on the Korean version is good enough to be able to appreciate the story and characters. I fully admit beforehand that yes, there's a chance I missed out on some nuance and depth by experiencing the story in this way. When the game's English version comes out, I'll be sure to check that one out too. Nothing else other than to see if my opinions change in any meaningful way. With that large content warning out of the way, let's begin. The story starts you off in the same way the original game did, in medias res. A casino heist is happening, and a phantom thief known by his codename, Joker, tries to evade security. Eventually, however, he encounters another phantom thief who fights him, and seemingly manages to overpower him in a fight. This is where the game decides to end the prologue on a cliffhanger and cuts back to the protagonist of P5X. He's a student that seemingly doesn't care about his future and has no desire for anything. Eventually, his life changes when he presses the Metaverse Navigator app that mysteriously installed itself onto his phone and ends up on the Metaverse, a sort of mirror world of reality full of monsters called Shadows, and a talking owl mascot named Ruffle. And yes, I know he's called Ruferu in-game, but I'll continue to call him Ruffle since 1, I think that rolls off the tongue better than Ruferu, and 2, I'm willing to bet that Ruffle is what the localization team will change his name to in the English version. Much like how Kuma got changed to Teddy in Persona 4, which means that this video will age very well. Our protagonist gets attacked by the shadows in the metaverse, which becomes too much for Ruffle to handle alone. Right when the shadows have him on the ropes, our hero awakens to a power from within called a persona, allowing him to summon his initial persona, Yanasik. After a sequence of events, our hero teams up with Ruffle to form a group of Phantom Thieves and henceforth is called Wonder while in the metaverse. And the Phantom Thieves' main goal is to take down people whose desires have twisted and are causing harm to others while being largely untouchable by the authorities in real life. Along the way, the two recruit others to their cause, and before you know it, the Phantom Thieves are taking down corrupt adults left and right. Now, if any of this sounds like I'm just describing the plot of the original Persona 5 is because it does. It's similar to the original game. Too similar if you ask me. And as someone that played the original and the Royal re-release multiple times, it's hard not to feel as though I'm just playing through a worse version of that story. I've read some of the translated interviews over on Persona Central where the devs mentioned that despite the game's development being outsourced to Blackwing's game studio in China, that the core of the story was handled in-house by Atlus themselves. I understand that many of the references and callbacks are intentional to draw parallels, and that yes, there's likely going to be a big twist later on that explains why the story and characters are so similar to that of the OG game. But at the same time, it doesn't make for a very interesting story right now. It's a shame because I wouldn't even say the story is outright bad. In fact, they are, for the most part, pretty likable characters. While half the main cast, namely Wonder and Ruffle, come across as bland versions of Joker and Morgana respectively, the other two, Motoha and especially Shun, are pretty cool characters and I feel invested enough in their respective stories. You could argue that they're also variants of some of the OG cast, but I can definitely say they're not bland or boring to watch. However, for the most part, I found myself drawn more towards the secondary cast members, namely the Phantom Idols. Early on, it's revealed that Wonder can summon metaverse versions of people he's met or will meet in the real world, with these cognitive summons called Phantom Idols. It's a pretty silly way to justify the game's gacha system being canon, sure, but the character designs here are more varied and being more than just different variants of the OG's cast, like the primary cast seems to be, while still being fairly consistent with the design language established by the OG game. This makes sense as this game brings back Shigenori Soejima, who's been doing the character designs for the Persona series since Persona 3. As I mentioned before, there's only 6 social links at launch, with 2 more added in version 1.1. Only 4 of these belong to the real versions of the Phantom Idols. This means that the majority of the cast only appear briefly as background characters at best. It's not uncommon for a gacha game to do things like this, but it does contribute to the game feeling rather unfinished at the moment. With version 1.1 only adding 2, that means we'll have to wait much longer to see the personal stories of each of these original characters. We've come to the end of the video, and the question you probably have now is, would you recommend this game? I'll divide my answer for the 2 groups that I feel are going to be more interested in Persona 5 Cross. The first is for people that are already fans of the Persona series but don't care for mobile games, much less gacha games. For the past few years, the market for gacha games has grown from being a niche genre to one that's captured mainstream attention and can succeed at a global scale. While P5X does have some quality of life features that make the game just a bit more generous than some of the more popular competition, it's still a gacha game at its core. If the genre's more popular offerings like Genshin Impact didn't do anything to convert you, I can't see this game doing so either unless you're such a massive Persona fan that you'll try any entry in the series. The second answer I have is for people already interested in gacha games, and maybe only ever play mobile games, and as such, this would be their first entry in the Persona series. In that case, it's pretty easy to recommend. It has more than a few quality of life features that allow the game to respect your time and adjust itself very easily to a busy schedule, and the gameplay is among the better turn-based combat systems found within the gacha genre. And the story, while being set within the world of Persona 5, stars a brand new cast of characters, making it extremely newcomer-friendly. However, the barrier for entry at the moment isn't exactly newcomer-friendly. It's easy to download the app from the official Korean site and grab the publicly available auto-translator and extract it to the PC's client folder. But since it's a machine translation, it can often take you out of the games to play it this way. This means that in spite of the game being friendly towards newcomers, the vast majority of players in the West at the moment are likely already hardcore Persona fans. Hopefully it won't be long before Atlus West announces the game's official localization that it becomes more readily available to a wider audience. Not to mention what I think it's a much bigger issue, and it's the fact that we are currently living in the best possible era for gacha games where it's very competitive and gacha fans are very spoiled for choice. I highly doubt that anyone who's a hardcore gacha player is going to go out of their way to play this game when there's already tons of games coming out, officially in English, and also very close to their Chinese release, if not having a worldwide release right from the get-go. And that's the end of the video. Let me know what you guys think. Please like the video, share it with your friends, leave a comment if you liked it. Or if you didn't like it, just leave a comment giving me some feedback so I can do better next time. Wow, this video took a while to make. I only intended this to be maybe 10 minutes at most, but I ended up writing a lot more to say. I had to cut down a lot from my original script. Yeah, the original rant about the story was much longer. Yeah, hopefully I made this much shorter, and when I'm editing this, it won't be that much longer than I intended. Maybe like half an hour at most. Yeah. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, see ya.